Hello and welcome to Future Back Drinking, a new podcast series from PepsiCo and Time. I'm your host, Dr. Athina Kanioura, and as PepsiCo's Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer, I believe it's incredibly important to speak with today's industry leaders and explore the emerging innovations and ideas that are certain to impact all of us. Listen along as top-tier visionaries reveal the challenges, opportunities, and wow moments they've encountered in transforming today's fast-paced world. Future Back Drinking is more than just a podcast. It's a journey through the now into the next, served with a twist. Join me to explore what the future holds, with some of the brightest minds paving the way. This episode features Julie Sweet, the Chairwoman and CEO of Accenture, the leading global professional service company, helping the world's largest organizations reinvent their enterprise, and ranked by outlets such as Fortune and the New York Times as one of the most powerful women in America. Listen to our conversation about what it looks like to tackle GenAI in the business, and of course, Julie's story of her path to the C-suite. Here is our conversation. Hi, Julie. So nice to see you again.
Well, thank you, Athena. And I would just say right back at you because you have been a pioneer. I mean, right now, obviously, data and AI is having a moment, maybe more than a moment, we hope, as you know. And when I look at where Accenture's leadership is, I look right back at you and the very important role that you played in helping us become today's leader in AI and in data. And so I am just so excited to reconnect with my old friend today and, really get to have a great conversation. So thank you.
Julie, I remember the day when I was still in the company, in Accenture. I remember the day when you were announced CEO. We never expected the moment that in this industry, in this company of, back then 500,000 people, there would be ever a female CEO. Looking back at that moment, what was in your mind as you were thinking, oh my God, I am the new CEO, as a pivotal moment also for the generation of women that you are now shaping because of that decision of that company?
Well, it's a great question. When I think back to that moment, there were three things kind of going on at once. On the one hand, I was the first woman CEO, which obviously has huge significance to so many people, men and women, actually, because it was such an exciting thing to see. I also was the first CEO that didn't start out of school. And so we've had incredible CEOs in our past, and all of them went to college, graduated, and started at Accenture. And I'm the only CEO that didn't start in consulting. So I, was a lawyer first. I actually joined Accenture as a lawyer. And when you put those three things together, I really think about the mandate I had, which was to continue to what we now call reinvent, but to bring kind of outside-in thinking from an insider, right? Accenture was really challenging itself over the last several years. And I think I was really a product of a strategy that says, if you want to be the most innovative company in the world, then you have to make sure you're valuing diversity because diversity drives innovation. You need to, as a part of that, not only look at diversity such as, gender, sexual orientation, or ethnicity, but experience. And so it was my job to continue to make sure that Accenture was bringing in outside perspectives, a great magnet for talent, and that we really had the right culture and experience that we could provide so that everyone at Accenture could really be themselves and be a part of, unleashing this amazing innovation.
Which is wonderful. And just to follow up on that point, what is the role of diverse experiences and diversity of thinking?
I think there's a very special moment happening right now when you think about diversity and business value, because the age of AI is now upon us. CEOs and boards understand that they really do need to reinvent, that AI is not about being incremental. And when you start to think about the concept of reinvention, about doing things differently to achieve different outcomes, of course, innovation is the word that, comes to mind, right? Reinvention requires that culture of innovation, the ability to innovate. And that's where you get the connection to diversity. Because many, many CEOs are saying that even though we're very successful today, what got us here is not what's going to help us be successful in the future. And they're looking for the diverse experiences and points of view. And so I think that there's an opportunity here to just continuously demonstrate that diversity creates business value because it helps make you innovative. It helps make you have the capabilities you need to truly reinvent and achieve a different outcome. We call it the next performance frontier.
You have talked a lot about the reinvention of the enterprise, of course, embracing technology and new ways of thinking. And my question is, why now? I know the obvious answer is because of GenAI, but is it GenAI the only reason of why now?
Maybe just to take you back for a moment, Athina, to 2013. So you'll remember that at that time, Accenture put out its technology vision, which we have done now for, I think, 30 years. And at the time, we said that technology vision was said every business would be a digital business. And everyone disagreed. It's hard to imagine now, but at the time, we spent a year with CIOs and CEOs saying, I'm not a digital business. Now, if you fast forward to 2019, by 2019, about 70% of our business was digital, cloud, and security. And it had started back in 2013 to be way less than 20%. So major pivot of our business reflecting how our clients were pivoting. And at the time in 2019, we said the next decade was going to be about technology moving from kind of pilots and experiments to being the heart of an enterprise. And that all roads of strategy, all roads would lead to technology. Now, little did we know that the pandemic would actually massively accelerate that because it exposed, in fact, how often companies really weren't that digital yet when they suddenly had to go completely online. And so for me, 2019 was actually a really pivotal moment because that was when at Accenture we pivoted to say, everybody at Accenture needs to understand core technologies because they would be the core of not only what we served for our clients, but what we would operate. And at that time, we introduced something called TQ, where all of our people have to pass assessments around core technologies, including AI. And so now if you fast forward to where we are today, what is different? Well, in 2022, we announced that we thought the companies that would be successful would have to reinvent using tech, data, and AI. And pretty much very few companies, it felt a lot like 2013, really embraced this idea of AI. They'd understood digital and moved to cloud, but it was not a top priority. What the advent of GenAI did was to actually help companies understand in a more tangible way why AI was important to reinvention. And so I think that's really why this is such a pivotal moment. It's the understanding that came when GenAI was something that everyone could digest. And so if you think back to compare it to cloud was harder to understand and it took several years. GenAI made AI really, really tangible. And that's why I think this is such an important moment because there's a common understanding of the impact. And so we're moving much more rapidly to have companies really take advantage of the opportunity presented by AI.
Do you have a point of view of which industries you believe are more vulnerable than others in being disrupted? If so, if there are any industries, or it could be every industry, I don't know, it's you talk to many CEOs, what would be the advice that you would give them?
Well, first of all, the reason GenAI is so powerful is it is actually the first time in 3 decades that I can credibly stand in front of the CEO or C-suite of any industry, put up a chart, have their entire enterprise on it, incredibly say that if you actually deploy at every place where it is relevant, you will reinvent yourself because the impact is so material across the enterprise. If you think of it, any other technology, it really just isn't that ability to do so. So it is actually going to disrupt every industry, because in every industry, we're seeing that there are leaders who are in fact going to embrace it and use it across the board. So that's, I think, really important to understand, and that even in industries that are slower to adopt today, say utilities and energy being among them, there are leaders within those industries that are adopting. And so that's the first part. I think the second part to understand in terms of kind of like what to do about it, right, is this is where you need, first of all, brutal honesty about where you are. So where is, we call it the digital core, and then understanding the power of the technology and what might limit you. And so my best advice to CEOs is to understand really where they are in from technology, what is the industry standard, and then what's possible. And what's possible means looking outside of your industry as well if you want to be a leader. And that's why we work so closely across industry, so that when we're talking to our clients, we're not just saying, here's what banking is doing. It's here's what banking's doing. Here's what consumer goods is doing around the people, which, because, the consumer experience. Here's what retail is doing. And then try to create a leapfrog moment for our clients.
You mentioned the importance of leadership in many of your interviews. You are responsible for an organization that is very human and people-centric, right? So you provide services, technology services. You rely on tech, but you rely on the talent of those people as well that you have. Yeah. So what are you looking, number one, in an employee of Accenture? Right? As you're thinking of the DNA of that Accenture employee, what are the traits? And then also in your leadership team.
Athina, you've touched on something that, I'm super passionate about, because I believe everything we do starts with leadership. But answering your question about what do we look for in everyone, well, there's one question we ask every person who interviews. We say, what have you learned in the last 6 months? We don't care if you learned how to bake a cake or you learned some great new AI. What we care about is, do we have people who like to learn? Because we know that as a company, we are going to continuously having to reinvent ourselves and learn new skills and grow. And we've seen that over and over again. If you think about even our pivot from digital being less than 20% to, that being our entire business. And so we really look for learners. With respect to our leadership, whether it's at my level in terms of my direct reports or leaders as they're coming up, we look to our leadership essentials. We have 8 of them, but the one I want to call out, that is lead with excellence, confidence, and humility. And the reason humility is so important is that in times of great change, when you need to reinvent, you have to be willing to challenge what you've been doing, including things you've put in place. I've now been you've been CEO for 5 years. I'm undoing things that were great decisions 3 years ago, but are not the right decisions now. And so having the humility to build great teams, to know what you don't know, to be willing to challenge yourselves, I believe is never more important than right now.
So if you were to think back on how you have evolved personally as a leader, as a CEO in an organization, okay, first year is always very different from the 5th year. What were the biggest pivots you have personally made? What you have learned, what you have adopted and adjusted in terms of style of communication that you can kind of share with us?
I think 2 things come to mind. First of all, I work on my communication skills every year, and I've done that for over a decade now. And I do so because communication is such a critical skill. It's really important when you're young and you're trying to, make it in your career, because if you're a good communicator, it helps in your career. And at my level now, it's absolutely critical to be able to inspire and to help embrace change and make sure that we're all moving. We have a very big organization. We need to move in one direction. And so I really invest in communication skills. And my favorite book on this is called Weekend Language by Andy Craig. So I highly recommend it. The second thing in terms of what I've learned is that I've really learned that I personally need to spend time being inspired and being challenged, not simply in the context of business. Of course, I'm always talking to our amazing ecosystem partners. I'm always trying to learn. But I will once or twice a year go to a conference where the conference is really about challenging my personal thinking, not about me being on stage. And there's a couple of ones that are really well curated for CEOs. And it's always hard because you can never just take 2 days out of the schedule to do something that looks like, is it really paying off? Because it's not about selling. It's not about speaking. It's about time away. And you cannot underestimate, as a leader at any level, the need to have time to think and to challenge your thinking. And as much as you may think you're doing so, most likely there's a little bit more that you should do or can do differently. And that's something that I've really learned over the last 5 years, is that it's absolutely critical, if I'm to keep steering Accenture in the right direction, is to give that private time for my own thinking to be challenged.
Oh, I follow you. I read all your interviews. There have been many interviews recently, not just from you, but from very prominent female CEOs that talk about the challenges of gender equity and the 50-50 that we have all been discussing, have been hearing, and I know you are actively working on in the company, doesn't seem to materialize. What do you see? Are we going to pivot? Are we still very behind? What do we need to do differently?
Well, first of all, let's just think about this conversation. A decade ago, it would not have happened. You would not have been in your role. I would not have been in my role, right? And so I do believe there's been a lot of progress. There is not enough progress, right? But there's been a lot of progress. I also believe that we are demonstrating over and over again that diversity is tied to business value. And at this moment when we need to think differently, I see CEOs that I'm working with thinking differently about diversity. They know they have to have different thinking at the table. So at the same time, it doesn't happen by accident, right? It still needs to be very intentional. You get to a point when it is easier. So in many places at Accenture today, it's so different than a decade ago. And yet at the same time, if you take your eye off the ball, if you don't make sure that people are connecting the value, that they're understanding that people are different and you have to have an environment that allows everyone to thrive, you can move backwards. So I'm optimistic. I think there's a burning platform, which is always what's needed, right? So people understand that there's a reason the diversity is so critical to the enterprise. And then we actually have learned a lot. And if we stay the course, we'll continue to make progress.
That's very optimistic. And you always like to see the glass half full, so I'll take it. Okay, now to the interesting round, lightning round with Julie. Okay. And these are going to be the tough questions. So, the biggest success you have had so far as CEO in your mind, could be personal, it could be customer, you don't have to call the customer, any type of success, but also biggest mistake that you think you've made.
Biggest success was navigating the pandemic for our clients. We never dropped the ball. And that was a time when trust was really built even stronger because we were there for our clients. Biggest mistake, thinking the job gets easier. Because I will tell you, I thought 5 years in, I'd be doing great, right? And then look at the last 5 years, every year I feel like there's some new challenge, right? And so I've now reconciled that I have the best job in the world, and that does not mean that it's going to get any easier.
I attest to that. It's you will never find a more committed, but also sleep-deprived CEO and chairwoman than Julie. I remember calls at 4 a.m. her time. So, Julie, next topic for you. The biggest myth that people have around AI?
I love this question. The biggest myth is you don't have to have good data if you have GenAI.
So true. I love that. Okay, great, because it justifies our investment in data infrastructure.
I'm here to serve, Athina. I'm here to serve.
Great. Okay, last one. In the light of course, our podcast being Future Back Drinking, who would you have a drink with and why? It can be live or not live, whatever you choose.
That is a fun question. I would love to have a drink with Nelson Mandela.
And why?
Talk about a great leader. I mean, I would love to get to meet him. It's like would have been just one of the highlights of my life. You know, read so much about him. He's such an inspiring leader. What courage. So if I could go back, he's who I'd love to meet.
Oh my God. Awesome. Okay. Firstly, you are amazing. You are such a wonderful role model. This has been the highlight of my month, for sure, till I go to my son's graduation in 2 hours. It's what a delight to talk to you. Julie, cheers, and thank you so much for being such an inspiration for many of us across the world.
Thank you, Athina. Thanks for having me. Thanks for being such a good friend, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for joining us on Future Back Drinking. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and stay connected with us on all your favorite podcast platforms.